morning, everybody. And before I commence my presentation, I want to thank the Bangalore branch, Mr. Bhatt, Mr. Shetty, for giving me this opportunity to be in front of you to address a very important topic and very kind of contemporary topic in the light of what is happening around us. And I also want to thank Mohan for, I think the praise, which I thought was too generous, and I don't know whether I deserve that, but, so he has been a good friend for so many years, so really appreciate that. So if you look at now, and Mohan also talked about, the necessity of, quality control in audit, and I think this has been this is not a new thing. This has been a universal theme. If I look at, the standard on quality control which I am talking about, it came in the year 2008. So it is not a new thing. It is not a reactionary standard based on the events which are surrounding us today. It has been, implemented, with perspective in mind that ultimately the quality is what matters in any of the audit and assurance engagements. This is SQC 1 is in line with international standard on quality control, which is also called ISQC 1. Obviously there are differences between the two, but there are very subtle differences. So more or less, it is in line with what is there in the ISQC 1. So if you look at what is happening now today, that every day some news or the other keeps coming. Either there are financial irregularities, banks talk about NPAs, NPA story never seems to be ending. Every quarter, you see a major write-off. There are various allegations, counter allegations about, diversion of money, siphoning of money, etc., etc. And then I think the most important agency in this whole activity, which is in the news, is the auditors, and everybody is essentially questioning the quality of the auditors. Okay. So what happens is that so there are two aspects here. Because I have been auditor myself. One is that obviously you cannot ignore this particular aspect of quality, in doing whatever you do as auditors. But at the same time, we also need to recognize the kind of an important role that we play in the whole, the capital market, financial statement reporting perspective. I think it also shows that everybody is actually relying on this signature which is there at the end of the audit report, and many decisions are made, or companies' fortunes are made or kind of unwound depending on ultimately what we sign. But at the same time, I think what is also needs to be looked into is the role of the management, the role of the rating agencies, the role of the board of directors, independent directors, etc., etc. They also play a crucial role. But we are there, and while we can all debate as to why typically maybe auditors are getting a disproportionate attention vis-a-vis the others, but I think that is not something for us to debate. I think we need to really figure out as to what we need to do and what we should be doing. And I think one of the most critical aspect is maintaining the quality. So it has to be tone at the top in the firm, and quality control over engagements, ethical requirements, having human resources, who are competent, and have the same ethical values, and obviously, putting the monitoring mechanism in place to ensure that quality is always adhered to. And I think the most age-old principle, I think we shall not change over a period of time. But somehow I think, it has always been, at the back of mind, but it never got so much of prominence, is the auditor's traditional way of doing things, which is applying skepticism to everything what we do. So SQC 1, but before I do that, I think Mohan, so this is essentially a principle. So SQC 1 is on 2-3 counts. One is that it actually talks about the firm's own quality control procedures, okay, within the organization, within the firm, and also talks about specific engagement quality control related procedures and the monitoring mechanism to deal with it. So it is applicable to essentially assurance and audit related engagements, and we all know that audit is audit of financial statements, limited reviews, we sign off pro forma statements on the prospectus, and then of course we also do agreed upon procedures as our auditors, and I think each of these aspects are covered by this SQC 1. It should be suitably comprehensive. That obviously I think what is required for a big firm is not what is required for a mid-sized firm or a small firm. But taking cue from the principles, I think, which have been enumerated, I think each firm needs to devise its own methodology of implementing the quality control. And then obviously it has to be in conjunction with code of ethics, and I think you had a seminar about a week or 10 days back on the code of ethics. I think the institute has also introduced a new code of ethics which is applicable from 2020, and various other regulatory pronouncements. The most important, of course, the auditing standard which is applicable on quality control is SA 220, which is applicable to a specific audit related engagements. Now, before I get into it, and I think Mohan talked about one NFRO report which came yesterday, which was about a specific activity, but without really getting into that, I want to highlight to you one report which came in October by QRB. So QRB actually examined 51 firms and 64 audit files, and that report is on the website, and I think which makes a very interesting reading, fairly detailed report, and I think we can definitely use that to reflect on what we are doing and how we need to improve on some of those aspects. There were key findings on SQC 1. Okay, that is one. Second thing is that one of the key observations were there that there are 6 elements of SQC 1, which I will talk about it later, and all 6 elements, areas of improvement, non-compliance, were part of this review. So none of these, had to be, all these improvements will have to be addressed. 29% of the reviewed firms had findings on the ethical requirement, like say for example, obtaining annual independent confirmation or not including ICA and regulatory requirements for the purpose of determining the independence of the professional staff and the firm. 25% engagement performance in terms of not documenting consultations, establishing policies for SQC1, etc. There were almost 19 non-compliances of 19 standards of auditing. And if you look at the report, I think there is a detailed evaluation as to what percentage for each of those essays where there had been non-compliances. There were non-compliances for auditing reporting standards like 700, 705, 6 and all that. But for the purpose of now this topic, the most important observation is that out of these 51 firms, 64 files, you had 37% non-compliances only with regard to SQC1. So what happens is that so now you look at a situation that you have so much of challenge in the external environment. You have all these the professional standards in place, especially SQC1. And then if you look at the review report, which essentially covers typically between 12, 13 to about 18, 19 year, you have 37% non-compliances on SQC1. So that really means that we have a lot more ground to cover from an audit standpoint. So what are the objectives of the SQC? The objective is to provide firm with a reasonable assurance that the firm and its personnel comply with applicable professional standards. Professional standards, we all know: auditing standards, accounting standards, code of ethics, etc. Firm's policies on quality and ethics and applicable laws and regulations. And that, based on the application and implementation of these quality control standards, okay, whatever reports which are issued by the firm or the engagement partners within the firm are appropriate in those circumstances. I think this is the objective of that. Now there are 6 elements to this entire to this entire quality control standard. One is the tone at the top. So essentially management or the firm senior management's responsibility in implementing, designing and implementing the quality control system within the firm. The second is, of course, what are the ethical requirements and how do we comply with that. Third, client acceptance and continuance. So what are the processes which the firm needs to put in place for not only accepting the clients but also continuing the relationship with the client. Fourth, of course, is human resources. I mean, we need quality people to do audit. So what are the kind of ingredients? So right from the recruitment to training, and all these aspects are covered broadly in the SQC1 standard. Obviously, the engagement performance. So this is a very specific to a particular engagement. What are the control mechanisms that we need to put in place for reviewing quality control on a particular engagement? That is also covered. And then the last one is, of course, the monitoring. And the monitoring will be through inspection and various other activities. Now, obviously, each of these are not like a standalone activity. I mean, they are all overlapping, they are all integrated. I mean, without human resources, I can't have a proper engagement performance, and then obviously then there could be a failure on audit itself. So the quality, so all these are intertwined, and I think not to be read in isolation to each other. There are some key definitions. I will not get too much into it. Engagement quality control review is quality control review for a particular engagement. Engagement quality control reviewer is either a partner or a senior person within the firm, or even SQC1 goes on to say that if the firm doesn't have the adequate resources, then you can actually engage some external consultant to do that activity on behalf of you. Or you can even have a team performing that. So if you have a team, then it has to be led by a person who is a member of the institute. So he is the engagement, or he or she is the engagement quality control reviewer. Inspection is a part of a monitoring exercise. So inspection is done after the completion of all the engagement to ensure that how quality control which was implemented by the firm has ultimately fared at the end of the engagement or after the engagements are done. This is to make sure that if there are any improvements required, you can actually start implementing those improvements in the future. Monitoring exercise, as I said, design, implementation and monitoring. So what is the monitoring mechanism there? Reasonable assurance. So each of these quality control should give a reasonable assurance to the firm. So reasonable assurance for this SQC is a high assurance, but not absolute assurance. And we know what reasonable assurance is from an audit standpoint, audit report standpoint. So to that extent, this is different than that particular definition. And then of course suitably qualified external person. So if somebody were to engage another external person not within the organization, then what are the qualities that he should have? So that definition essentially covers that aspect. So these are some of the key definitions. Now the first element of SQC1 is the leadership responsibility. So I think what you need to very clearly understand here is that without tone at the top, okay, implementation of quality control and percolating it throughout the organization is difficult. So typically I think the policies and procedures should be devised in such a way that the firm actually promotes a quality kind of culture. I think just before I do that, you should also look at the implementation guide, and I think many of the things which I have said here are all from the implementation guide, which is fairly exhaustive, fairly detailed, which gives draft, which gives illustrative policies as well as illustrative formats of some of the activities which we need to do. So the firms, and so one is that we should make the CMP, either the country managing partner or the managing partner or the senior partner of the firm responsible for the quality control within the firm. And it is important that this message of quality control is actually delivered across the breadth of the firms. This is the first part of it. So what is the first aspect is that the firm CEO and managing partner has to assume the ultimate responsibility for design, implementation and operating effectiveness of the quality control. Now obviously that the ultimate, so buck stops at this CEO and the MD. So you will obviously take help of other partner, senior partner to help you in achieving that objective, but the ultimate responsibility lies with the CEO. Second aspect which is very important is to educate people on various aspects of quality control. And most important is that what are the consequences of non-compliance with the quality control, okay, on the personnel, on the firm, the personnel, the partners, etc. That communication also is very important. It will be ultimate responsibility of the managing partner or the head of the firm to continuously evaluate client relationships and specific engagement. And obviously how he will do that, or how he or she will do that, is by implementing each of these elements of SQC, which will give an overview of what needs to be done from quality control perspective. The other aspect, I think we all grapple with this issue all the time, is that balancing between fees paid and what attention time that we need to spend. And many a times, if we are saddled with low fees, my advice to you, and of course this SQC one also recommends, that the last thing you should be doing is cutting corners to sign off the financial statement. That is not a solution. Okay. So this is one is a commercial consideration, but the quality has to be maintained at all costs. So then there are various mechanisms in which you need to deal with this, negotiate better fees, or maybe if you're not able to do that, you can even call quits, in the relationship. But what is not at all advisable is cutting corners to get the job done, because I have low fees. And as I said, that typically a managing partner in this case will take the help of a person who can be designated as a quality control partner. So in a larger firm, obviously you can have a more elaborate structure where you have a partner who is designated as a professional practice head, and then under that various aspects of SQC1 can be monitored and measured by different set of experienced partner. But once the firm becomes small, mid-sized firm or small firm, obviously this role will have to be performed by a limited set of people. So that's the thing. I think the other aspect which is very important in drafting a policy, so is to say that for assurance partners, audit and assurance partner, or audit and assurance personnel, okay, one of the key criteria of performance evaluation will be, how the quality, on quality control, their ratings have been or how they have performed on that. Okay, and then obviously there will be an incentive for doing a great job on making sure that the quality control is adhered to, and then obviously there will be a disincentive, for not complying with the quality control. And then I think the other aspect which is very important is to, so when you designate any QC partner, I think it will be important that you have a partner who is experienced enough, to drive quality control. Because what happens is that I'm driving a quality control within the firm, then I need to have enough experience, enough seniority to actually guide the entire audit fraternity within the firm to ensure that discipline is maintained while complying with the quality control. Because here, non-compliance will mean it's a huge reputational risk for the firm. The other aspect I think which is very critical is that when you have a quality control documentation and the policy within the organization, you distribute that to when people are hired, not only distribute but in fact train them. So it can be part of your induction program. So when you induct people, typically you make them go through the firm's quality control policies and procedures as one of the key ingredients of the induction program. And then obviously, hold a training program at least annually. I mean, where I was working, we used to have continuous, programs at various levels within the firm. There could be, discussion amongst the partners, there could be partners and senior management directors, there could be the entire group, so that has to be done. I don't think there is any, leeway out of that. The second aspect I think which is, so I think the first most important thing I think the takeaway is that the firm has to set the tone at the top, okay, and the leader of the firm has to take the ultimate responsibility for designing, implementing, monitoring and controlling the quality. That's the message. With regard to ethical requirements, so what is the ethical requirement? I mean, we all know that there are these principles of ethics, integrity, maintaining confidentiality, professional behavior, professional competence, and due care and objectivity. I think these are the 5, principles of ethics, and we all know what each of these are. And then we have to also identify what could be the possible threats to the firm while conducting an assurance engagement. So those threats are, again, I think you can go to the SQC, there is a threat of familiarity, there is a threat of, financial interest, within the company which you are auditing, self-review, advocacy, and intimidation threat. So for example, advocacy, if you do some litigation services for an audit client, is it appropriate to do that? Now that's an advocacy threat, okay? Or self-interest. Self-interest means I buy shares of an audit firm, audit client, okay? Then obviously it is a self-interest. Self-review, I do some implementation, I only do the audit of that. It's a self-review, okay? And intimidation threat is one which is like, you have a point of view and the client is aggressive to say that we don't agree with you and this is what is the aggressive policy that we are going to implement. Now that's an intimidation threat and we have to deal with those threats. So what are the typical policies? Now these are all kind of typical policies. You don't, these are like a guiding standard. You don't have to kind of take everything on board depending on the size. I think you can tailor it to suit your requirement. Now, while the implementation standard guide talks about having another, so I think the most important thing, in ethical requirements, one of the key aspects is maintaining independence, okay, vis-a-vis my audit and assurance client. This is one of the critical themes. So there are these 5 principles of ethics, and these are the 5 or 6 threats which typically an auditor faces. But what is the key ingredient, in the ethical requirement is that how do I maintain independence, okay, vis-a-vis my audit client, so that I can do my job, of signing off the audited financial statement without any bias, fear, or favor. I think this is the most critical part of it. So you don't have to set up another independence and ethics partner. Obviously, it can be under the leadership of quality control partner, and then you develop a mechanism, and I think some of those aspects are enumerated in this particular, to ensure that I think there is a compliance towards independence requirement, and there are and how do you identify and how do you report breaches, etc. is all covered in this particular thing. What is also important is that each partner has to be entrusted with the responsibility of the reporting on the compliances as well as the breaches promptly to the firm and promptly to the managing partner. And then obviously depending on the seriousness of the issue, then a disciplinary action process will have to be established within the firm. What is important in this whole independence, and as the firm becomes larger, I think this becomes more important, is that how do you assimilate this whole information about clients, what are the services that you are rendering, and then a mechanism to deal with independence at the client level and at the engagement specific level. This is the most critical. So the robustness of collection of this information and putting it on a database accessible to people who are relevant, who need to be accessing this particular database, keeping it up to date is one of the most important objectives of the quality control mechanism. And obviously, I think we have to keep it up to date not only from your own firm's perspective, but you have to make sure. So, for example, now Code of Ethics of 2009 has been now replaced by Code of Ethics for 2019. So you have to make sure that now whatever independence policies and procedures which are in place, we have to make sure that at least at the minimum the Code of Ethics is complied with. If you have anything stricter, by all means you can introduce that. That's not a problem. The other aspect I think is very important is the communication to the teams, and preparing a list of relationships, I think, which will essentially create a conflict, vis-a-vis the independent. And as I said, that the communication promptly of all the changes, I think, which happen in, as they occur, and regular communication about the responsibility and consequences of the breach. Now, the other aspect I think which is most important is the training to partners and relevant staff on threats of independence and safeguards to be taken to eliminate or to reduce to an acceptable level. So I think somewhere, I think, the message has to be given very clearly to the people that there cannot be any compromise on the independence requirement. Because any breach of independence, depending on the severity, means that you cannot continue the relationship, you cannot continue the engagement, or you don't want to land in an embarrassing situation where you should not have done something which you are not permitted to do because there was a breach of independence. So to avoid all that, I think it is extremely important that you provide the necessary independence, because this has to be like on the job, right? I think when you take a client, when you are executing an assignment or when you are pitching for some services, etc. I think you need to know that if I am going for, say, accounting services in an audit client, can I do it? I mean, so once you, for example, sign an engagement and say that, okay, now I have started the assignment, I think, and then if you have to withdraw, then it's a huge embarrassment to everybody. So I think this is the most critical part of it. The other aspect, I think, which I just want to highlight is that what are the kind of safeguards that you need to be put in place. So one is the whole independence. The other aspect is that you have many reviews which go on within the organization. So you have your own internal reviews, so which is a monitoring mechanism. You will have external reviews. For example, peer review would have done the review of the firm, or there could have been a QRB review done on some of the assignments based on the criteria which is established. So if there were any kind of weaknesses, inherent weaknesses which were identified in each of these policies, you will need to also take that into consideration while implementing your independence policies and procedures. What is also critical is that there is also a threat of familiarity in any client. Okay, so for example, if somebody is doing an audit for many years, okay, is there a familiarity threat and the familiarity threat could be that I'm doing this audit for so many years, so I know this client. Is there a threat or is there a kind of a risk that people will start relaxing, okay, or not putting as much rigor as they would have typically put, in maybe earlier years. Now this is only a familiarity threat, so it is not that it happens all the time. So you could have a situation where, maybe audit manager is continuing for 10 years and there is no threat. But how do we address some of these threats? So what happens is that you will have to put a mechanism in place to look at what has been the experience of the firm, and whether the firm needs to put in place a policy whereby you want to rotate your team, okay, say once in maybe 5 years or something like that. And this also helps because many a times I think your staff may require a change of job. They may require they may desire to do another assignment, I think, which gives them a different experience. So it actually achieves both the objectives. But in case of listed companies, I think typically, I think the ethics would require that engagement partner is rotated after every 7 years. So that's the one. It is not only in the, so this is absolutely based on the ethics, code of ethics of the institute, but you can also introduce, in other clients which are not listed entities, depending on, say, for example, industry. Maybe a firm may decide that we want to introduce an audit rotation for, say, audits of financial services clients, because they are highly regulated. There's a lot of kind of judgment involved, regulations involved. So we want to rotate, our team or our partners, after a particular period of time for some of these industries, and you can take that decision. Obviously, there will be a cooling off period, and at an appropriate point of time, the cooling off period, you can actually reintroduce the engagement partner again. And typically, the cooling off period is about 2 years. The other aspect, I think, which also we need to look at is that I talked about engagement quality control review. So engagement quality control partner also needs to be rotated. The firm should have a mechanism in place to rotate engagement quality control review partner as well. I think what is also important is the prompt communication of breaches. Is very important, because then you can take the right decision at the right time. and what are the corrective actions which are taken. And you can actually put some additional safeguards, and this is again in the code of ethics also, that where your audit firm staff or partner has become a client personnel, so then do you need to put some additional mechanism in place? Say for example, typically the engagement may not require a quality control reviewer, but you may want to put a quality control reviewer. So all those additional safeguards we have to think through, and this is all also illuminated in the new code of ethics, so you can also have a look at it wherever you get time. But suppose if after whatever you do, if you come to a conclusion that you are not able to meet the independence requirement, or there are no adequate safeguards to reduce the risk to an acceptable level, then the only option for the firm is to actually withdraw from the engagement. And then obviously there could be many situations where I think you may need to consult legally as to what is the consequences. For example, now if you look at SEBI's rules and regulations vis-a-vis audit resignations for a listed company, I mean you can't resign. I mean if you have signed 3 quarters, then you can't resign in the last quarter unless you sign and then resign. So I think so what happens is that we have to keep all these regulatory provisions in mind while devising these policies. And typically annual independence confirmation, at least annual independence confirmation. I know some firms they take quarterly confirmations, may not be required depending on the size of the firm, but annual confirmation is absolutely must. It is not only taking a confirmation of your self-interest and maybe whether you are holding shares or not, but all the related aspect including compliance with ethics requirement, relationship with the client, business relationship, etc., etc. So it's an all-encompassing independence representation. And if you're doing an audit in a group where your subsidiary or your branch is audited by another firm, then you need to also put in mechanism in place to to include the reporting requirements on independence by that firm to the holding company audit firm. Acceptance and continuous of clients and specific engagement, very critical, especially you see now in the light of what is happening around. And this particular topic, this doesn't only concern, this element doesn't only concern the client related issues or client integrity, client reputation, but it actually also talks about whether we have the people, necessary expertise, necessary specialists within the firm to execute or to execute assignments or to serve. So it has got three aspects. Whether we are competent first. Second thing is that whether client is good enough for us to service. And the third is whether we can comply with the ethical requirement, which essentially is the independent requirement. So it is a three-pronged activity. So now here, I think one of the key aspects of client acceptance and continuance process is that assimilating as much information as you can about the client. Okay, and so typically there are, and I think you have these illustrative forms also. There is a client acceptance form and there is a client continuance form. And filling up of these and ensuring that those are all complied with is a must before you commit to the client that you are ready to serve as the auditors or assurance service provider. Okay, this is absolutely a must. And I think implementation guide actually goes on to say that what are the ingredients that we will be looking at. So obviously I think the background of senior management, background of board of directors, are there any cases? So you will typically do an internet search, you may be engaged some of the, some discrete inquiries you make about the directors, about this thing, are there any regulatory kind of non-compliances, are there any strictures which are issued, etc., etc. Then you will also look at which industry they belong to. Okay, so is it a financial services industry? All that stuff. Then look at annual report, interim result, maybe tax this thing. Do you have any information about any aggressive accounting practices? I mean, by reading those financial statements or just making those inquiries. I think those will be very important kind of inquiries to be made before you take up a client or you continue with the client. I think the other aspect which you need to also look at is that as I said, that one is the client reputation, second thing is that do you have the capability. So how do I deal with that? So I need to assess whether this client is operating in which kind of industry. So for example, if say I am practicing, I don't have a bank audit experience, then do I go and take a bank audit? Is something that which me as a practitioner I'll definitely deal with. Okay. So that kind of situation I will have to look at. Or if I want to build a capability in bank audit, then I will have to have a necessary team in place before I actually venture and pitch for the bank audit. So that's how I think is a critical aspect of it. What are the ethical issues? I mean, do I see any ethical issues with the company? These are all, many a times there could be a perception. You need to just look at, because you have so much of experience, you are operating in a particular market, you can glean a lot of information from talking to people, etc. In client's reputation, client's attitude toward fees, client's attitude towards aggressive accounting practices, then too much of pressure, low fees, but you have to complete in time. It's not practically possible to complete within that time frame. Many times you have to walk out, because you can't complete it. And if client is insistent on that deadline, you have to take a call that whether you want to continue with that. And then obviously lack of resources at our end, at the firm end. Communication with the preceding auditor, we all do that when the audit changes. Okay. And even providing a lot of services to a particular client. Now this is not I'm just saying this is a thread. What you have to do is that you have to manage these kind of perceptions. So doesn't mean that if you have a big client you have to straightway say no. But you have to just manage that. Are you comfortable enough to take up many assignments including audit, and obviously those many assignments will be something which is permissible for an audit client. I think the other aspect is other policy essentially talks about the capability within the firm, that we will only do those assignments where we have the necessary capability. Okay. And whatever is applicable to the client acceptance is as much applicable to client continuous. So when I am looking at a client continuous, we will not only, obviously we will not get into the familiarity with the client, but all other aspects. So for example, do I need to continue with the client because there are changes in the ownership, there are changes in the business, changes in the scope of work. Or like we had many issues with regard to payment of fees. The client is not paying fees. One of the key ingredients is that non-payment of undisputed fees creates an independence issue. And we should not be continuing with that unless those fees are paid. So that is another aspect of it. While going concern need not necessarily mean that there will be a client discontinuance, but this can be one of the risks that if there is a substantial doubt which is expressed on the going, then this will be a part of your evaluation as to whether you need to continue with the client. And of course, the most important thing is that there are many recommendations you have made, there are many suggestions you have made, but is client very kind of receptive to what you are doing? If they are receptive, great. Then there are no issues there. But if they are not receptive, they are not implementing what you are recommending, then what happens is that it creates a risk for the firm. And then obviously you have to establish a frequency for revaluation. Typically you will do on an annual basis, but there could be some exceptional circumstances in between. And then who does this is that obviously in a client continuance, the engagement partner will typically do an evaluation on an ongoing basis based on the policies and procedures which are determined by the firm. And then EP will submit the client acceptance and client continues to managing partner. You could have a committee of partners for approval, etc. And based on that, then the decision will be taken to either continue or accept or continue the client. Then the third one is of course engagement letter. You must sign engagement letter, that is critical. And then there could be a situation, and as I said, subject to the regulations, because as I said, SEBI has some restrictions around that. If you should also have a policy as to in what circumstances you will actually withdraw from the client or an engagement, and discussion with the people within the client, and then those who charge with governance. So this PCWG is a short form of that. And then you will have to inform the regulators, and because typically audit appointment is for 5 years. Now if you want to resign, then you will have to inform the regulators as to what are the reasons for it. The other element which is most critical, obviously, is the human resources. And human resources element of SQC covers recruitment of quality personnel, experienced personnel, what are our needs. So most important is that first we have to figure out what our needs are, and then prepare a recruitment plan, training plan, continuing education program, rewards for employees. In that rewards, the most important aspect will be is that what is the weightage given for quality control, what is the weightage given for the ethical requirements, etc., etc. So I think this human resources covers the entire gamut as to with regard to the personnel. So you will have to have a HR. Obviously, there has to be an HR function within the organization, and typically one of the partners, if you are a multi-partner firm, you will be given the responsibility of managing the entire HR function. Of course, supported by various, typically a professional who may not be could be an HR professional. So that's the kind of thing. I think what is important is that budgeting and planning and recruitment, I think, is the most important. You will take into consideration the deadlines, your clients, quality of the industries to which it belongs, what kind of travel plans are required, at what point of time it is required, what is the gamut of assignments that will be. So the first and foremost will be that you will have to do a resource planning to ensure that you have the right people at the right time. Then you have to have a proper hiring process. You could even engage somebody, experts to do background check, etc. in case of senior level employees. I think the most important is that what are the competencies which should be there for a partner or even a senior person within the organization is obviously somebody who has a commitment to the quality control and ethics, code of ethics. That is, I think, one key. Then engagement, is that person good enough for executing those engagements? Has the necessary industry experience? Knowledge, expert knowledge of accounting standards, auditing standards is a must if I'm an auditing partner. Skills around judgment and professional skepticism. Somebody who does that, can somebody withstand the pressure? All that. And while IT, yes, I think today, especially today, I think that knowledge is a very important element. So that is also critical, especially I think the new tools I think you can deploy now, analytics and all that. But that is something, this is recommendatory. I mean, even if you don't have the necessary expertise, I mean, you at least, I consider it that having somebody with a solid knowledge of IT within the audit firm is an absolute must for it. Without doing IT audit, you cannot do quality job. Then the firm assigns, responsibilities based on workload and all that. So these are all the modalities, I think, which are all identified here. So that I think one of the important aspects is that is my workload well balanced. Okay, to make sure that enough time is allowed to be spent on a client. And on-the-job training, firm designates personnel based on engagement type. So as what is required for the partners is also required for the personnel. What is important is the continuing education program within the organization. So like what we are doing now, CP events, I think is part of one of the continuing education programs where we can encourage our team members to participate in such events if we can't conduct it in-house. But typically, you should have a mechanism in place within the organization to continually educate our team on accounting standard, auditing standard, ethics issues, professional requirements, independence requirement, etc., etc. And doing it like a frequently, now that frequency can be decided depending on what is the size of the firm and the audit practice and the clients that we have. But it has to be fairly frequent. As you can see that every day or every week at least, there is some change or the other, either in company law or SEBI requirements or audit requirements and this and that and accounting standard. So I'll tell you, if you were to not be up to date, then the danger is that it will put the firm to a big risk. So this is absolutely must. Advancement of professionals. So I think within the firm you must have a mechanism to ensure that the right people are advanced within the organization. But as far as SQC 1 is concerned, I think one of the key ingredients for evaluation should be how the person has performed on the quality and the ethics. I think this is very important. And those have to be part of my evaluation process. Now this is regarding the engagement performance. So this is what this essentially means is that so there are few elements in the engagement performance. One is the planning process of engagement. Then the other is the execution, planning, execution. Execution will not talk so much in detail because you have another auditing standard for that. But then the storage and retrieval of the documentation, how do we put those policies in place? So that is the third part of it. The fourth part is, which is very important, is that engagement quality control review. On each engagement, as the engagements are ongoing, typically it is done by engagement quality review partner. So this is very important, at least for all listed companies and for any company which is in a specialized, any specialized assignment, any industry which is highly regulated, and various other criteria that you establish within the firm. Engagement quality review partner along with engagement partner and the engagement team, is highly recommended. So that's one part of it. Then of course the planning process, we all know that it will be on the responsible, not only depending on the size, what is the risk of fraud, putting all the work plan in place, audit programs, all that aspect. I think we'll have to devise. Most important will be a risk of fraud, IT risk. I think which is absolutely critical nowadays. Cyber security and all that are a big threat. Analytics, many firms are using that because analytics is really helping, making the audit process more, more robust. So those are, I think, some of the aspects, and then obviously the time budget to carry out. Then looking at all the auditing standards, accounting standards, what are the possible accounting and auditing issues which the client has faced so far, and what are the clients going to face. So for example, I think very simple one will be Ind AS changes. I mean, now Ind AS 116 has come in now. What is the impact of Ind AS 116 on my client? I think this is one will be a very important element within this thing. Or if a company has invested in a company which is we all know that okay, maybe there is some delinquencies that are there, then do we need to make a provision for some of those. So all those aspects which are judgmental, estimation, goodwill impairment, etc., will have to all be part of the planning, and the planning documentation will be typically in what is called as audit planning memorandum or audit strategy memorandum, which essentially encompasses all these ingredients. So what it typically will include is that which team is going to play that, what is my experience so far, what are the critical auditing and accounting issues, what are the risks, how we are going to do our planning to address some of those risks, okay, who will do what, okay, who will be the coordinators for what activity, what are the risks of fraud, what are the IT controls which the client has in place and which we need to test. The entire plan has to be documented in what is called the audit strategy memorandum or audit planning memorandum, and we have to put that in place. Then the third is of course then the allocation of work to different people, based on the quality and the experience. I think this is very important. There could be specialists who are doing, maybe Ind AS, so they will be doing Ind AS activity, and timing of the performance. You don't want kind of to revisit some of the work which you have done because it will just derail the whole timelines of the assignment. I think assembling the documentation, I think as per professional standards, so what happens is that you have all the documentation either in the electronic form or a hard copy, putting it in place, having permanent files, having audit files, based on sections, properly numbered, documented, signed off, tallying with the trial balance, tallying with the audited financial statement is absolutely a must. What is important is that, there has to be a policy in place to make sure that the work papers are stored and there is an integrity maintained. These are all client confidential papers and cannot be leaked, this thing. It could have serious consequences for that. And obviously the, who is the preparer, who is the signer, a reviewer, all that will be done. And no unauthorized changes should be allowed. So there has to be a proper archival policy that after a particular point of time, and it cannot be like in after 2 months or 3 months. I mean, it has to be fairly short period of time, that no alteration is allowed to be done to work papers once the engagement is complete. And then obviously use of password encryption for sharing a client sensitive data is absolutely a must. Retention of documentation, typically 7 years is from the date of audit report, is what you need to do from an engagement standpoint. And then obviously you'll have to have a policy in place that suppose audit file which is say 3-4 years old, who can access it, what should be the retrieval mechanism. We'll have to put that policy in place. Consultation is another critical aspect. So what happens there is that especially as the businesses are becoming more complex, and I have personally experienced that myself. As the businesses have become more complex and as the accounting standards are being implemented, new standards are being implemented, there is an estimation involved, there is a judgment involved. I think consultation within the organization with a group, typically, where somebody who is heading a technical group within the organization, who has the necessary expertise to guide the engagement team, is an absolute must. And I think that, to my mind, has to be there. Okay, so my point is that there should not be absolutely any hesitation in consulting. It is not that as if, you are kind of looked down upon, it is just that not that everybody knows everything, so I think consultation is great, it is very comforting, because I can have a sounding board and then, my views are actually kind of endorsed by somebody else. It's a big comfort. So I think consultation is absolutely critical. We must have policies in place. What are the typical consultations that you should be doing, and there are a whole lot of things which are there, where you need to do consultations, or you need to do in the sense there is no force here, it's all recommendatory practices. But I think some of these things I think will have to be done. And then obviously I think, whoever are the audit engagement teams, audit teams, I think what is also important is that we must have a good library in place, we must have a proper kind of web-based learning, maybe web-based documentation in place to make sure that people are accessing those easily and keeping them up to date. The other aspect is that documentation of consultation is a very important thing. What matters, what is first the policy of the firm? Based on that policy, whether the engagement team did that, and then documenting what happened, what was the resolution and how it was communicated to the client. You will also need to put in practice certain things, such as there could be a disagreement between engagement partner or a consulting partner, or engagement partner and a quality control partner. What is the mechanism we should have in place to make sure that those resolutions are done before audit report is issued? None of these things should be done after. Everything has to be done before the audit report. Not a problem. We can break now? Fine.
So we can ask, Sunil, we can ask some questions.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. No, so what I'll do is that I'll just finish this in 2 minutes and then maybe. So these are, I think, some of the policies. Then quality control review, as I said, the engagement quality control review partner. So what happens is that in a typical listed company, you will also have another partner who will review typically the entire planning documentation, how the risks were identified, how the audit process was carried out, what were the significant auditing and accounting issues, how they were resolved, etc. The disclosures in the financial statement, audit report, etc. before auditor accounts are managed. So this is, as I said, like consultation. This is again another good sounding board where I have somebody else, fresh eyes, looking at the accounts separately, and this is definitely done. So for all the listed companies and companies which are considered to be high risk. And then what should be the documentation for QC process and how the resolution has happened. And obviously the engagement quality review partner has to be sufficient experience, but cannot be part of the engagement. And the quality control partner has to meet the independence requirement like engagement team. Now monitoring, I think this is the last element. So what happens is that now we have, so there are two elements here. One, the quality control policies and procedures for the firm, quality control policies and procedures for the engagement, including consultation, quality review. But how do we ensure that these have been implemented? So the monitoring exercise is essentially, to ensure that those are monitored regularly on an ongoing basis so that the corrective actions can be taken at an appropriate point of time. The quality control partner is responsible for the design, implementation and control, and obviously will be reporting to the managing partner, and he or she has to ensure that all the policies and everything are all adequate and properly done. So how do we do kind of a monitoring exercise? One is of course the self-reporting, the other aspect is the inspection. So what happens is that the firm should have a policy in place that once all audits are done, completed, there has to be a mechanism in place of doing inspection of completed assignments. Okay. And the firm can designate one or more partners to do an inspection exercise. Okay, so it can be either one or two partners. In bigger firms, there is an audit quality review team which does that on an ongoing basis. And typically you take into consideration the criteria such as high risk engagement, specialized industries like say for example banking, any company where there are audit qualifications. I think we can going concern issues, and typically the quality control should be done that all engagement partners should be covered, at least one file should be covered. You can do a cyclical activity once in 3 years, 2 years, 1 year as the case may be. Then you can maybe have a criteria saying that we will include all first year engagements, irrespective of the nature and the risk around that. And then we must put the entire approach and timetable in place, including retention of inspection documentation. What is important here, I think, is the key aspect is of course the preparation of inspection report per engagement. So there has to be an inspection report per engagement identifying non-compliance on various aspects including firm policies, procedure, code of ethics, independence requirement and the whole audit methodology, and I think we have to put that in place. And then this all these corrective actions. So what happens is that at the end of the inspection report, you will have an inspection report for engagement, and then it will be typically assimilated to prepare a firm-wide or audit practice-wide engagement, the inspection report, which will have some of the observations as to what were the areas of improvement which were required, and what is the areas of improvement, and what are the improvements which need to be done over next year to ensure that none of those observations or the areas of improvement which were observed this year have been corrected in the next year or do not find again its place in the next year. So, and then obviously percolation of the findings of inspection to engagement partners and everybody is absolutely a critical part of it. If a firm is a part of a larger group of network, then obviously you can do it for the network rather than only for each firm separately. I think that is something that which you can do that. You should also have a policy in place to address any complaint allegations within the organization, with regard to various non-compliances, and those complaints should be taken seriously and should be addressed properly. And again, documentation of this entire thing, putting it in place, its storage, how many years that it should be stored, etc., will have to be determined, and that appropriate period of time will have to be determined by the individual firm concerned. And obviously, peer review. Now, if you are doing audit of a listed company anyway, it is mandatory to have a peer review certificate. But in all other cases, you are all encouraged to get the peer review done by the institute. So these were the 6 elements of SQC 1. Just to recap, toll on the top. Okay, ethical requirements, independence is criteria is primary. Third, client and acceptance and continuance procedure, which not only means integrity of the client, but your own capability to deliver service to the client. Fourth is of course, human resources. Fifth, engagement quality, performance, and the 6th one of course is the monitoring to ensure that the quality control policies and procedures are implemented effectively. So the implementation guide also has an annexure which has got the formats of each of these, like annual firm independence policies, acceptance continuous form, planning memorandum. Summary memorandum, I didn't talk about it. Summary memorandum is prepared before you sign the accounts, that you prepare as. So you essentially link the audit strategy memorandum with the summary memorandum, figuring out as to how you did the audit, whether there were any changes which were required to be done in the audit planning strategy during the year, what were the issues, accounting and auditing issues which you encountered during the audit, how you resolved it, what is the conclusion on the audit report, and the sign-off by respective partners. These are all covered in the summary memorandum. And then of course the quality control inspection checklist. So these are all fairly, I think, elaborate and detailed, which are there in the SQC. This is what I have to say on, I know, fairly kind of technical, fairly procedural, but we'll be happy to take your questions. We'll do that after, or?
We break for tea.
Okay. We can do it. Okay. So we'll have questions and answer after.